Welcome back, everyone. My name is Uri Talmor. Should have said that at each one, but uh, hopefully that much was obvious. Maybe not, but I think it's going to be our last one. We're going to wrap up the table, and then at the end, I'll talk about other projects that we have going. Cherie tells me I have to tell you to like and subscribe, so please do that. It helps the channel. All right, and let's go for it. So we left off at retrieval. Just a quick summary. I'll scroll all the way back up. We talked about naming the parts, identifying parts, unblending from the protector parts in the spirit of creating a self-to-part relationship. We talked about contracting quite a bit, witnessing. Eventually we got to witnessing. Some were baked in here. We talked about the 6Fs in a lot more detail. That little table is here. You can find those videos for more information on that. And then we got into witnessing after we talked about a lot of resourcing techniques and ideas, because you want to make sure you're doing, I think the best thing you can do in terms of trauma-informed is really learn the 6Fs and these first 3 steps. And all the trauma-informed you need is baked into that. I gave you some other options, but make sure you're really solid with that before you get into any kind of witnessing stuff. And then the last time we talked more about witnessing, we got into redos and do-overs, and now we're going to jump into retrievals. And I think we might be able to get through the rest of this today, even though there's, I mean, just judging by the number of little table rows, but maybe it'll take a bit of time to get through it. But I don't think so, but we'll see. All right, so now we're at retrieval. So you get here, there are a couple of things, just this is going to be a review. There are a couple of things you have to have in place before you would even attempt a retrieval. And a retrieval is essentially bringing the part out of whatever memory they're in the past to the present moment. That's how I think about it. Some folks see it more as you're just getting them from an unsafe place to a safe place. I think that's okay. I think that's necessary, but not sufficient in the biggest picture. Ultimately, we want clients grounded in reality. I'm sure I've mentioned this, I'll say it again. In A Course in Miracles, they have one of the simplest definitions of mental health. And it's essentially, sanity is a degree to which you are in touch with what is most true. And what is most true is that arguably the only thing that we have that we know exists is the present moment. So some of my philosophy there is drawn from those kinds of concepts, but also studying Buddhism forever, A Course in Miracles forever, and I really value any kind of practice that brings us back into the present moment. I've seen firsthand, and I've seen for clients just how powerful that can be. And what are we doing all this psychotherapy work for? You know, as we heal these parts that are trapped in the past and bring them into the present, it allows for our consciousness to be more grounded in the present. We have less filters, we have less history we're projecting onto folks, and we can be more in touch with what is most true. So all that said, that's another reason why I'm so big on the updating the age piece. So you can think of it as maybe 2 phases. There's asking the part if it wants to go somewhere safer, and it can create whatever place, or it could be, you know, a memory you have of a nature site. That's a really common thing. But it could also, of course, be something that is fantasy land. And I think that's fine as a stepping stone to eventually bring that part to the client in the present moment. And we'll go, I think we'll flesh that out a bit. I jump ahead of myself and then realize I've already typed all this stuff out. But you think of safe space as maybe phase 1 if you're not bringing them into the present moment, and then eventually later have them update the age and show them where they live. Okay, so a couple places you could ask that. Oh, and I wanted to also name what do you have in place? Again, this is going to be a review. Before you go into any of this, it's two main things. It is the part feels like the client gets it. That's the core thing. You have to have that as an absolute minimum. And if and when that sort of the retrieval stalls out, if you, let's say you have that in place, the part does feel like you get it, but it still doesn't want to come with you, then the next thing you go to, and it's fine to just go to it no matter what, is does this part feel like it can trust you? And we've gone over that, I think, at least once. If the answer is no, what does it need so that it can trust you? It'll almost always say something you can do immediately. Do that thing. An example would be, what do you need so you can trust me? Well, you need to listen to me. All right now, I want you to fully listen to this part. Just get into that state of deep listening, of fully attentive, and just notice what happens to the trust. And they'll get a sense of the trust getting stronger. And you can simply repeat that question over and over until, does this part feel like it can trust you now? It'll say yes. Would this part like to come with me to a safe place now? At that point, you should get a yes. The thing is, with the witnessing, if you're witnessing fully and you get that done fully, and then the part feels like, okay, they really get it, there's a lot of trust that gets built in that. So usually you don't have to worry about that. But always have that on your radar. Always have that as kind of a safety net. If things start to falter, explore the trust piece. All right. So a couple ways you could say this. Does this part feel like you get it? Yes, it does. Does this part feel like it can trust you? Yes, it does. Would this part like to go somewhere safer? Would this part like to go to a safe place? Would this part like to come with you? And this is more my take on it. I really want the parts to be with the client's present moment self. So this is more where I lean. So if no, the most common reason and the first thing to check out is if there's more that needs to be witnessed. So what else does it need you to understand? And or what are concerns? You address the concerns. And or build/repair a trust bridge. Does this part feel like it can trust you? So we went over that. If yes, but the part still doesn't want to be retrieved, explore the other options in this list. So if the part doesn't trust the client, what does it need so that it can trust you more? Then have the client meet that need immediately and capture the impact. Send the part your attention or trust or validation or whatever the part asks for, and notice what happens to the trust. And or you can always, the age piece. Does this part know how old you are? You can always make sure that that is clarified at any point. It can be such a powerful way to clear up the channel, the self-to-part channel. Okay, so if yes, it still doesn't want to be retrieved. Does this part know how old you are? Yes, it does, but it still doesn't want to be retrieved. Then explore the other options on this list. Is it the trust? Is there more it needs you to understand? And or are there simply other concerns? This is pretty comprehensive, those three things. It needs to be fully understood. There might be some other concerns. You can just ask about that. And then the trust piece. I can't think of any other example of why the retrieval would stall out. And there, of course, there might be. If you get the yes, and this is my bias, is just go to invite this part into your present home. Or oftentimes parts are felt in the heart area, especially after retrievals. So I like to ask, would this part like to come more into your heart? They can create any kind of safe space it would like there. And now I've gotten into the habit of simply saying both. It would sound something like, would this part like to join you in the present moment? You can show it your home. And if it'd like to, it can come more and more into your heart. Why I am so focused on these kinds of parts, the emotional body, exile, emotional-ish parts coming into the heart, is because I simply saw it happen over and over and over. When I would ask, where in your body would this part maybe like to go, it was always back into the heart, almost always, I'll say. And then, interestingly enough, my father, Chanoch Talmor, Hanak Talmor, uh, as Americans have to say it. He has his own YouTube video. He's passed away. He passed away in 2018. But he actually has a couple lectures that I think are pretty brilliant about holistic healing. And he talks about some really interesting concepts. I'm not going to get sidetracked into all that, but I think they're worth watching around the importance of love, the difference between kind of authentic, true love versus synthetic attention, like the things people do to try to get love. But it's really more about attention. It's like a synthetic form of love, and it doesn't quite land. This is akin to the control dramas that James Redfield talks about in what was that book, The Celestine Prophecy. At these different control dramas that people can get into, there's a couple that he talks about that are more kind of victim based, like gosh, what is it? The one is it's been a while since I've thought of this, but I'm kind of helpless and I need people to help me do things and I can't quite do it myself. And it's not quite true. And so that's a way to kind of take energy from somebody else as opposed to being tapped in yourself to your own, chi, kundalini, self-led energy, whatever you want to, frame that as, just your biological energy. And then a more extreme version along the victim spectrum is I've been completely victimized and everyone's out to get me. So you have kind of a spectrum of more the victim one, and then you have the more like offender aggressive control drama, which one is the less intense one is something along the lines of folks who are just kind of critical no matter what you do. They got something to say about it. And I think a lot of people can just relate to those kinds of critical parts. But then a more extreme version of that are the people or the parts that are just like out to like attack. And so again, you have it along a spectrum. And he would say those are control dramas that people get conditioned into doing, or it could come out of trauma, essentially because they've learned not to be attached or not to trust or not to even be aware that they can rely on themselves and they can tap into their own energy. That clearly it's a very differentiation model, not a co-regulation, attachment-based framework, both of which I think are completely valid. This is all fun and games and, learning how to tap into your own energy. But that doesn't really happen in a vacuum. And you don't even know who you are outside of relationships with other people. So it's a bit of a paradox. Both channels are very valid. All that to say, why did I go into that whole tangent? Oh, the heart piece. And so my dad essentially lectured, in part of the lecture, he actually talks about why the heart area, you can call it the heart chakra or the energy center, is actually important. And he actually went into, he did a lot of this kind of work in his own way. I think he used the journey. Those of you who are familiar with the journey and the path, he used that. He used a bunch of Byron Katie with his patients. He's a holistic MD. And so he had this sense over time that if people felt sensations away from their heart, that wasn't quite in alignment. So he would keep working with them, working with their parts until eventually they just felt more of it in their heart. So watch his lecture if you're interested. You can just search for that on YouTube. I'll put links below. And I actually have a handout that I made for clients around the control dramas, the James Redfield control dramas. So I'll load that up to my website and make a PDF so you can click the link below. And you can take a look at that and feel free to download it and use it with your clients. It's a nice little resource. All right, so where were we? Would this like to? Okay, so the whole heart piece. Okay, good. So let's just keep going. So another row here, or yeah, row here for retrieval. So update the age shortly after the retrieval if that has not already happened. I feel like this is really important. I love how, kind of the newer iterations of IFS do some age updating earlier with protector parts. That was not a thing 20 years ago. I don't remember it being a thing. So I think that's wonderful. And you kind of use that as necessary with protector parts to help kind of do these mini updates, these pit stop updates, because it does create a more clear self to part connection. And I pretty much always, so that's if necessary with protector parts earlier on in the work, but I always update the age at the end because of my obsession with I want folks in the present moment as much as possible. So ask the part if you'd like to know how old you are. If it does, go ahead and gently update the part, is what I usually say. And then if the part doesn't want to be updated, can the part share its concern about knowing your current age? Then address the concerns until it is open to being updated. And if for some reason an age update is not possible, try to complete this another time. The part will feel the safest, have the strongest connection to the client, and will be most likely to fully develop if it's in the present moment with the client. That's my dogma. I'll own it as such. I've just seen from experience that is the most valuable landing spot for parts. All right, unburdening, moving right along. So, are there any emotions or beliefs this part would like to release that's not a part of who it really is? I remember this, that it's not a part of who it really is, being from Tony Irvine Blank. If yes, let those go back to their source, where they came from is one way you could do it. Just let these parts release. Traditionally, I remember Dick offering parts to release their burdens to one of the elements, earth, wind, fire, or something else. I think light is another one I should add in here. Light or something else. I used to say that each time. I just didn't feel like it was necessary. And I do like, sometimes it can be nice. There's something nice about just sending it back to where it came from, sending it back to its source, especially if you're comfortable and you see the value of doing a lot of introject unburdening, where you're dealing with family members or loved ones. And what's baked into that, sending it back to those people, is that you can't do that work for other people. But children have these intense, very consistent redemption drives. And that could be one of the reasons why they absorb these things. And so just, sending it back energetically or just symbolically, so that mom can be responsible for her stuff. There's just something about that feels very right action, like Buddhists talk about right action, something that feels right about that. And that's essentially it. But here's the thing. There are essentially two genres of items to send back. There are emotion, or to unburden. There's emotions that you unburden, and then there's beliefs and thoughts that you unburden, and those are qualitatively different. The interesting thing about unburdening emotions, so it could be, oftentimes at this point, it could be guilt, it could be shame. I wouldn't get into unburdening sadness, but that's fine. If parts can do that, I think those kinds of feelings actually need to be felt and are better felt. Like there's something we gain from processing our sadness and our grief. But maybe there's an excess and you're able to just release it. And a really interesting distinction about unburdening here is that it's different than cathartic. I'm saying grief is probably better cathartic, like actually experienced and felt, so it can complete something. I think there's character development and maturity that happens in that. We've touched on that. But there is a possibility when people are in a safe place. So if you think about the distinction, you had a part in a memory where things were not safe, And in that context, the emotional processing is more likely to be cathartic for a number of reasons. One is because they're still in that environment, which would maybe create or trigger that feeling. And two is that it's the first time you're kind of tapping into those feelings. And again, I think things like grief just need to be felt. So it's just kind of the first thing that's going to happen, hopefully, in my opinion. And all that said, let's just say there's whatever catharsis or even just release that happened back then, it is much more possible from a safe environment after you've done the retrieval to simply start just releasing things. And that's amazing. So that is a really important distinction to keep in mind in terms of emotional processing. Does it need to be cathartic and felt? Or could these feelings simply be released? You know, when you look at processes like tapping, and even just like NLP type of interventions where, you know, they kind of they have these, let's call them permission slips, where people maybe could kind of easily and gracefully just let some things go. I think it is important to know that sometimes that is an option, and people don't have to feel every little thing. Much more likely to happen after a retrieval. And so you offer that. Like, are there any emotions at this point, even the sadness, that can simply be released or can be unburdened to the elements or otherwise? So what I was touching on earlier is I think sadness is less likely to ever really be processed in that way. Um, but shame and guilt can more easily simply be released because shame and guilt is much more tied to beliefs. You have to have certain types of judgments and beliefs to feel guilt. Like, what I did was bad. That's a story. Then I end up feeling guilt as like a secondary response to the judgment. Or I have a story, I am a bad person. Therefore, I then will probably feel shame. And so as you're releasing the beliefs, it's pretty easy and gracefully we can release those kinds of emotions, if you don't even call them emotions, guilt and shame. um, Fear is another one that I do think lends itself to simply being released in an unburdening kind of way. Anxiety, fear, yes. Anger, yes. And again, anger can also often be tied to beliefs. um, so you clear out the beliefs, you question the beliefs, and now, oh yeah, anger, sure, unburden it, and actually it's not even there anymore. Um, so that's my 2 cents about emotions. Sadness, I do, again, I just think that needs to be felt. And I make a distinction oftentimes to come back to the belief piece. Are there any other beliefs that are not a part of who this part really is, and or it can just simply see are no longer true, and those can simply be released pretty easily. Again, I've mentioned it. I think Byron Katie is an amazing teacher of CBT. I don't know if I know that she would officially call it that, but that's what it is as far as CBT lenses would see it. And so all that said, the next row, is there anything this part is deciding about itself, men, women, or others, or the world that it would like to let go? And you can do these one at a time because these are pretty common, global, and core areas that people make stories about. So any beliefs or decisions about itself, any beliefs or decisions it made globally about men, about women, about people, and or about the world that it would like to let go of. It can be really valuable to touch on each one of these. And most of the time, I'll throw it out there as one sentence, but that might be like too concentrated. But is there anything that this part decided about itself, about men, about women, about the world that would like to let go? And then after each one is released, and this is Byron Katie, what is more true? And let this new belief replace the old one. What she says, I'll just touch on Byron Katie a little bit. Uh, it's not the beliefs, it's not the stories, it's not the judgments that cause us suffering. It's the lack of questioning them. As long as we stay in inquiry and hold these beliefs loosely, we're much more likely to then replace them with what might be more true. And what's amazing about her process is eventually she gets to what's the opposite of that belief? And is it maybe just as true, if not more true? And what's wonderful about the mind, and for me, this is the intellectual body channel of our being, is that it wants to know what's most true. It wants to understand things as clearly as possible. So as soon as it's given an alternative that makes more sense, it automatically replaces the old one. You don't even have to cue a client to replace it with the old one. It's just reflect for a moment. What's just as true or more true that's maybe the opposite, and what you think is that one may be more true, and just the mind will do the rest. So again, just such a powerful, organized system of doing CBT. And this would all fall under the unburdening umbrella. And when we're getting into the invite, and some people call it the integration step, this is when you're bringing in things that were either lost or didn't get a chance to fully develop. And that's the next step, really. So you can do them in tandem. I like to jump back and forth sometimes. So let's say, is there anything this part would like to let go of, emotions or beliefs? It's like, oh yeah, I want to release all this fear now. Great, just let it release it and do it to one of the elements. And as it's doing that, or after it does that, let it notice what would it like to bring back in. Um, Whatever it may be lost along the way or didn't get a chance to fully develop. Dick used to talk about how he would say, nature abhors a vacuum. I think that's a really powerful idea. If we don't put something in there consciously, it could lend itself for bringing back what is familiar. Just from a neural pathways perspective, that these are well-worn pathways. So let's start creating some new pathways, and we might have to wax on, wax off, like practice this a bit for it to become more permanent. But take a moment to actively allow them to replace it with something. And that's the invitation or integration step in IFS. All right, so one more row about unburdening. So if any limiting / negative core belief is resisting being released, then I go full on Byron Katie. Is that belief true? Can you absolutely believe it's true? This is a summary. These are her questions. How do you respond when you do believe it's true? And you take your time letting them respond to each of these. Who would you or this part be without that belief? And then the last one, she calls this one the turnaround. So there's these 4 questions and then the turnaround. What's an opposite of this belief that is just as or more true? That's the work. That's her process. She travels the world asking people essentially just these questions. She does amazing, amazing work with people. Go to thework.com. I'll put that link below. She's got a ton of resources, a lot of examples of her working with people. And my favorite book of hers is called Loving What Is. What I love about that book is it's her husband, who I think is a Buddhist scholar, who's also brilliant, and he talks a bit about her work. It has her origin story in there, which is absolutely worth hearing, how she developed or received these questions and how it transformed her. And then it's got excerpts from her training. So you get to hear her work with folks. It's kind of got everything. It's a pretty long audiobook, but it's totally worth it. I listened to it on an audiobook, and I highly recommend that. I'll put a link to that below. Okay, and then we're back. Now we're heading forward to the invitation, or some people call this the integration. In essence, is there anything this part lost, had taken away, or didn't get a chance to fully develop that it would like to reclaim / allow to further develop? If yes, call it back, give it more space to develop, and notice how that feels. Because that's this, we'll call it the second to the last step. And then over the horizon, these are one of these supplemental, we'll call it an advanced technique that I'll offer somewhere else by Michi Rose. It's a way to work with what people invite in and make it stronger. And she's got a few steps of that. It's absolutely brilliant. Something that I think any parts worker would want in their toolkit. All right, so moving right along, befriend / redo. If a client agrees, let this exile part know that you will come back to it. Ask the part how frequently it would like that to happen. So this is towards the end with the exiles. And now, more recently, this is a more recent thing in my encourages daily check-ins for 3 to 4 weeks following an exile retrieval in order to help solidify the healing and growth of the working. Yeah, if you can encourage clients and if they can follow through on this, I will certainly vouch for this. Really, the more the better. And I do believe that eventually parts can get to a point where they're essentially integrated. But that's a sidebar conversation. IFS may not agree with that. Befriending redo, if seems necessary with the very young part, ask if there are other parts who would like to befriend and keep this part company. I don't know that I've ever done this, but it's something that's out there. Okay, Space of Love, inspired by, this is Anastasia is a mystic in the Siberian forest, and Vladimir, I think Megre is her husband, and he wrote these, it's like 10 books that are absolutely mind-blowing about how he met Anastasia and just, I'll just say what she was capable of and what she taught him about permaculture and raising children, essentially. And so one of her concepts around child rearing was that parents create a space of love for children to grow into. And that's how they, in her culture, she claims that it's an ancient Vedic culture in Russia. And so this is how, I'll share a little bit about this. It's so, I think, beautiful. So in their culture, so much of the focus was on permaculture, and she has these techniques of raising food in ways and cultivating and cultivating them and having a relationship with the food in a way where the food grows so that it's medicinal for your body. And she claims that you can cure pretty much anything if you grow food this way, and that's how food was meant to be, and we've just kind of lost touch with that wisdom. And there are some other communities that explore that. There's a woman named Margaret, I think, Small Wright. She wrote a book called Behaving as If the God in All Life Mattered. And she has her own, I don't know what to call it. Let's call it a permaculture compound where she grows plants and has a garden and like kind of energetically work with the plants. And then there's Finhorn, I think that's in England, where they have these kinds of practices. So if you want to explore some other resources around that kind of thing. So that's a sidebar. So this culture was super into permaculture. They had gardens, 2.5 acres, that were self-sustaining, and they grew everything in a way where, they had really good health. And then the other thing they were very focused on was, how do we raise kids the right way? And so they had games that the children would play with each other, where they essentially were encouraged to like really feel each other's energy. So I'll give you an example. There was one game where they dance down these rows, and the children hold their hands out, and as you dance down the row with your eyes closed, you just kind of slap each person's hand as you're dancing down this row. And over time, people start to get a sense of who their soulmate is. And then eventually, when they're of age, when they propose to each other, the proposal is, would you do me the honor of helping me create a space of love in order to bring children into. Um, and then and then they have the whole community gets involved during the engagement process, where uh, they'll go around to each neighbor. They essentially lived in eco villages. And so they would go to each neighbor and visit and then share, oh, wow, I really love your basil plants. They're amazing. And then the next neighbor might say, oh, wow, your apple tree is so incredible. And then the next neighbor, oh, you have such a lovely dog. And then the whole community would show up on their wedding day. And as a community, they would decide where to plant everything. Um, and they would bring, I skipped a part. So the neighbors with the basil plants would bring seeds for the basil plants, and then the apple tree person would bring seeds for the apple tree, and they would work together to decide on this new plot of land for this new family where everything will go. And then they do a ceremony where the whole community plants everything at once, and that's the start of that space of love. Um, and then just one last piece around that, the parents would then grow some trees, uh, as you know, they're having children for each child, so that the wood from those trees could be used to build their children's home in the future. And they do things to work with the trees and bless the trees so that it has a certain type of love energy. Anyways, that's just to paint a picture. If you combine that idea with the Gordon Neufeld attachment stages, and with the family story piece, you again, it's these kind of sidebar interventions you could do that are wonderful to weave into this. And again, I'll make something else available for those. But definitely, if you could read any of the Anastasia books, they're amazing. I think they're actually out of print, but you have to get the Russian publisher version. So just, you may not be able to find it on Amazon. You have to actually find the website from Russia, but they have English translations. And then Gordon Neufeld, I've mentioned, one of the most amazing attachment theorists and practitioners in Canada. He's got these attachment needs for each year up until the age of 6, and it's just amazing. And so I will say there's a way to work with parts at this point where you can support them in developing further, which isn't really an IFS thing, but I do this now almost all the time with parts. So that's a preview to this little piece. When I create these extra little videos, I'll just make it one program so that there's just one program that has all these little add-ons. So you'll have them all in one place. All right, there we go. All right, almost done. So now re-rolling, and this is the last step in the IFS process, the last mega step. So bring in the protective parts from earlier and ask how they feel about the work you just did and how they relate to the part you retrieved. You can address any concerns. I don't know that I ever hear any concerns at this point. Just like as you've witnessed the part, and everyone's falling in love with this part, the client, you have so much compassion for it. The same thing is happening for the protector parts. So, and if there are concerns, you address them. Most of the time, the protector parts are now more self-led and have more compassion and care for the retrieved parts. So you bring them in and you just kind of check in with them, and that's almost always what they say. And then the re-roll, and I have this in purple now. So remember, green is for protector parts, light blue is for exile parts, but then purple could be for any part. So to each part, protector and protected, what was this part meant to do? And with whatever new roles are desired, capture the impact. How does it feel for this part to step into this new role? This is a very, very powerful step, and you are essentially helping people restructure their personalities. And I think this is one of the reasons where in the IFS community, we just don't talk about personality disorders. Most people think about personality disorders as something that can't be changed. Now, finally, there's research around borderline personality disorder changed if people do DBT for many, many years. But IFS, and I hope somebody does research on this to capture the impact, this is how we help people change personalities. There is an excerpt from A Course in Miracles. There's the purpose, process, and practice of psychotherapy. I mentioned it earlier where we talked about having a certain attitude towards clients. So there's an excerpt I have that I put into a little, just a little handout. So I'll put that in a link below too. And what I love about this one excerpt is that it talks about two main things. First, anger, and how anger is oftentimes an ego defense mechanism to kind of justify why we may not need to change. And I'm not doing it justice, but there's just a brilliant piece there around anger. But then essentially what it goes on to explain is that most people, when they go into psychotherapy, their goal is not to change. Their goal is to find out ways to get everyone else to change, so that they don't have to change. And that can be a pretty long phase for a lot of people when they first get into therapy. And then eventually they recognize, oh, wow, this work is actually about me changing. And so this is one of the things I really love about IFS is you don't even have to get into like a discussion about this or to call someone out or to, it's baked into this process where people are given these opportunities and invitations to change and to do really profound changes. And the irony with these re-rollings is oftentimes protector parts actually want to do the opposite of what they've been doing. But first, you have to unburden the exiles. You have to heal the exiles. Otherwise, there's a lot of energy that these protector parts are polarizing with, and out of necessity, they feel like they have to do these original roles that they have been stuck doing. I won't even say original roles. It's possible that originally they were doing the roles they're about to step back into, but let's call it the trauma-based roles. They can't let that go until the exiles are worked with. Okay, so what was this part meant to do? Capture the impact. And then here we have, after calling back protector parts and how they respond to what has changed, or meeting the exile part again, address any sense of responsibility to protect the exile and see if that can be released. So can this part see that it doesn't have to feel responsible to take care of others, this part anymore? It can let you be responsible for that. And this, I think, is very important. We don't want these parts to be parentified. It is best for the present moment person and or self-energy, self-leadership to be the responsible one. This comes right out of Dick's training as a structural family therapist, where you're working with these families and you want to make sure that the parents are the ones who are the leaders because they're more responsible. And that the children who are more vulnerable don't feel parentified. And this is why I'm not a big fan of questions like we touched on early on. Let's see, we're a safe place, present. Like, is there another part that wants to be with this part? I'm not a fan of that kind of thing. I've never found that to be necessary. So I may actually just take that out of this table. Okay, and then last row, what would this part like to do instead now that the other part is better? After this new role is identified, there's just a way to deepen into the reroll. Give it permission to move into this role and notice how it feels for this part and for you, how this feels for this part and for you. And then capture the impact. How does it feel for the other parts to have this part in this new role? So you can capture impact for the actual part stepping into the new role, and then how does it feel for all these other parts to have this part shift into this new role? Um, yeah. All right, we did it. This is it. And this is the table I wish I would have had. Let me just name all these wonderful people, and that'll be the final thing. So, of course, Richard Schwartz, Dick Schwartz. Uh, so grateful for the work that he's done, not just in creating this, but he has been like relentless in promoting it. And my theory is it went viral because he started getting on podcasts. And it got researched, validated finally. Something that Dick would share is that he had an opportunity to get his model researched years ago, and there was a certain amount of money it would have cost. And one of his biggest regrets was not doing that, like, I don't know, 20, 25 years ago, whatever it was. But eventually it happened, and that helped set the stage. And then Dick just got out there. It's amazing. Paul Ginter, I did a level one. I was a program assistant for him. Just one of the loveliest IFS trainers out there. Tony Irvine Blank, she created a couples version of IFS, internal family systems. Couples therapy manual is what I drew from for some of her stuff. But I completely lucked out. In my level one training, Dick was there, Tony was there. And Tony's just phenomenal. She's a main person in the IFS circle that they offer the online course. So definitely learn from her if you get the chance. And her couple system is called Intimacy from the Inside Out, IFIO. And so she's busy teaching that stuff now. Deb Bowman, one of my Gestalt mentors from Naropa University, she essentially created the graduate program that I graduated from. Michi Rose, she was my IFS coach in getting certified. I don't even know what it's called. It's some complicated name, but there's a certification you can get in IFS to be able to certify other people and be the coach. So she's the person I worked under. And I did a workshop that she did years ago at Castlewood, which is where I learned the raising inner spiritual energies side exercise. And she is phenomenal. And I think she was essentially like the second person to learn IFS, if I remember that correctly. Like she's been there right from the beginning with Richard Schwartz. So super grateful that I got to learn from her. Julia Mick is my absolute favorite breath worker on the planet. She happens to be in Boulder, Colorado. I did one of her advanced trainings, the Pause, Allow, Appreciate work. That is from her. And she's got other programs now that she offers. She's absolutely worth checking out. Joe Shirley and Annette Debruel. I butchered, Annette, your name. I'm so sorry. I met Annette a few years ago. She is a big focusing person and IFS person and polyvagal person. She is a coach in Canada. And then Joe Shirley, I've talked about. She introduced me to Joe Shirley's work, his own kind of way of doing focusing processing. Both of them are worth checking out. Then there's this Uri Talmor guy. I don't know what to say about him. Stephen Hayes, acceptance and commitment therapy. Again, ACT in action. If you study one thing from ACT, that is worth watching. Harville Hendricks, one of my surrogate father figures, Tim Jordan, who ran one of the summer camps. I met him when I was like 19. I've known him ever since. And now my daughter and I go to his current version of the camp. Now it's an all-girls camp. So I'm a counselor. She's a camper. That's in St. Louis, Missouri. And he was heavily trained in Imago. So learned some of that from him. And then I took a course on this, a weekend elective 1 credit hour course at Naropa. He was like the first. I know Stan Tatkin is all the rage now, and he is amazing. I did a couple trainings for PACT, and I did a level 2 training with Stan. He's a genius, and again, totally worth training with, learning from. But Harville Hendricks was the first guy, I think, who put attachment-based couples therapy on the map. And so some of these were drawn from him. Marshall Rosenberg, of course, nonviolent communication. I talked plenty about my experiences there. Gordon Neufeld, I mentioned today, the attachment theorist in Canada. Diane Poole Heller, she's also in my neck of the woods in Colorado. She has a program called, I think it's an acronym. I think it's, I don't want to misname it. So she has a model that draws on somatic experiencing and parts work. And she's collaborated with Dick a few times. So I've watched some of her stuff. And so she was the one who inspired the block of ice technique that I think IFS people would maybe cringe at. We talked about Byron Katie today. Lisa Wimberger is the neurosculpting person. And so she's the one who inspired the piece around feeling of protector parts care for the client. Eric Walterstorff is a brilliant, I think he's a type of coach, but he works, I think, internationally, like helping write policy around conflict resolution. And I probably completely butchered that, but he created the training that I did, containment and autonomic regulation, through the Love and Trauma Institute, that was spun off from somatic experiencing. And it is no longer a thing, unfortunately. But he's got some videos, some interviews on YouTube that are definitely worth watching. Whatever you can find from him is worth watching. He's brilliant. And he developed the trauma wave. And now I have my own version of that. And I'll make a program on that at some point. And then Risa Caparo, last but not least, she wrote a book called Awakening Somatic Intelligence. It is a brilliant, brilliant book. She is essentially like a type of holistic PT practitioner, and she shares these amazing case examples of people that she worked with where she helps them like relax certain parts of their bodies. I'm not going to do this justice, just the book is worth reading, but essentially relaxing certain diaphragms. There's diaphragms throughout your body, not just under the lungs, but there's one in your throat, one under the lungs, one at the base of your, kind of where the root chakra is, your pelvic bone. Working with those to relax them, and then doing some other things to essentially experience gravity a little differently. And then if you do that, then the body is able to heal pretty amazingly from like physical injuries. And so she had the piece around like nature, your body and consciousness self-renews, self-organizes, and is self-aware, which is to say it has its own intelligence. So I spoke about that earlier on. So that is who that is. All right. So thank you. If you made it all the way to the end here, congratulations. And we do have a lot of things planned. Cherie and I were talking about it this morning. There's courses I want to make. There's a membership thing we want to put together where I can do demos and do Q&A sessions. So that's in the works. And that's where the courses will be housed. I'm probably going to redo some of these videos and replace them. So, which model?
Basically, your model over time.
So,
once a month, you should, if they're interested, they should email you.
Once a month? Oh, the training, the small person training. So I will start doing small person trainings where I'll use this webinar as, you know, I'll make it kind of a required prerequisite that you watch this, or you watch this in tandem with the training. And then there's 6 different exercises. And so some of them are those extra exercises that I didn't go into detail around, that I'll record instructions to and make available somewhere else. And so in the trainings I've done, what I like to do is essentially do demos each time, one demo each time with people in the small group. I'll keep it to like 6 or 9 people. I'm still trying to figure out how big these will be, but just small little groups. And then I go through each of the exercise, one meeting at a time, and then run through each of the exercises. What I'm thinking now is probably do each one twice. There's essentially 6 practices. There's doing just a regular IFS practice. There's a group practice, a parts work that you would do with the group. So we can do that with the 6 participants that we have. Then there is the raising inner spiritual energy one. There is an authentic relating circle practice that I like to do as part of all this. There's the family story. And then there's one more. Oh, the seat of power. So I think that was 6. I may have missed one, but these are what I love to do with folks when I train them is run them through all 6 of those, and we'll set it up so that people practice with each other in between our meetings. The meetings will be monthly, and then through the course of a year, get at least that type and that much of an experience in the spirit of helping you do this work. So that's the plan right now. And so be on the lookout for that, or by the time you watch this, there'll be a link below on where to sign up for that kind of thing. So I'll have like 3 or 4 of those kinds of groups running eventually, is the hope. Yeah, and I think that's it. And there's some other things. There's so much material I have in my head that I want to, get out there and then use that as a supplement to actually train people and use in the community. So
Do they know how to sign up to the newsletter?
if you want, the best way right now to keep on top of all this is to sign up for the newsletter on my website. That link is below. Just go to my website, scroll down for a bit, and something will pop up and say, give us your email address. And so consent to giving the email address. And yeah, and any of these things as we are, we have new things, we'll announce it there. Anything else? All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, my lovely wife, Cherie. And hope to stay connected and hope to have a lot more to offer everyone sooner rather than later. All right. Take good care.